Sometimes all you need is a good classic boomer shooter. In today's installment of A Little Late, where we cover games sometimes a few days too late, and in this case 7 years too late, we'll be covering the game Dusk. Dusk was created by New Blood Interactive in December of 2018, and it really emulates the classic shooters of the 90s. Sort of like Doom, but a lot more like Quake in feel. It also feels a little bit like Half-Life in the way that it handles physics. This is going to be a shorter review, just because it's a really simple game. To start, let's cover the story. It's incredibly simple. You're the intruder. You never really learn a ton about your character, but you get got by the cultists in Dusk, Pennsylvania, and wake up in a room armed with nothing but a pair of scythes. Side note, I gotta say, Pennsylvania is a total 50-50. You either have a great time in Pittsburgh, or you end up in some cultist basement. That put aside, once you escape, you fall into the classic I gotta get out of here of a 90s shooter, and end up fighting your way through cultists, the military, and Lovecraftian horrors for 3 episodes that make up 10 to 12 episodes each. While I think the Doom guy is quite a bit more powerful and vengeful than the intruder seems pretty pissed that he has been thrust into having to escape from Pennsylvania. In the foothills, it's mostly farmland full of cultists. In the facilities, you're fighting through an industrial wasteland full of cultists in the military. And finally, in the Nameless City, you're fighting cultists and monsters in through what the wiki calls a dark parallel dimension. But I'm pretty sure the game heavily implies this to be hell. By the end of the game, you've killed Okay, you can look at the name on the screen, and you can determine how you want to say it. According to them, they're not God, not the devil, but after digging through some wiki entries, he's actually a Lovecraftian god. He looks like this, and once he's dead, you have his power and are some sort of Lord of Death. You never really find out what that means, though, because the game ends after that. I'm going to be completely honest, the game is not special for the story. I don't think any boomer shooter is really good for the story. I haven't found one yet, at least. What makes Dusk special to me is the gameplay, the level design, and the enemy design. I'm going to touch on the graphics here. When I say that this is a boomer shooter, I mean this in every aspect. Please do not expect it to have good graphics, because this in some ways does look like a reskin of Quake. The textures are muddy, the polygons are polygonal, and there's not a lot of them, and overall this game does not look pretty. That being said, I think there's a certain charm to it. It really does make me feel like I'm much younger again playing a game that came out close to my birth than a game that came out 7 years ago. They were really able to capture the vintage game feel and not in a negative way. Moving on to the gameplay, I see a lot of people compare it to Quake or Unreal Tournament. I haven't played those games in quite a while. It's been maybe 10 or 15 years since I've played them, so I'm not going to be able to compare it to those. The best I can describe the gameplay is that it's similar to Brutal Doom, but you're playing at 2 times speed in a full 3D rendered environment. At its core, you're maneuvering around the environment, trying to avoid getting hit while cycling through all of your weapons, trying not to run out of ammo, and trying to make the best of the situation. You loot ammo and health off of corpses, but there's also the occasional secret room to stock up. I found that in many of the missions, I would run large loops around bosses, or try and run a train of enemies around the arena while avoiding getting hit. I think that's what makes it sound repetitive, but in every single level I had to find a new way of dealing with enemies that was at least creative or had to spin on that basic premise from earlier. One of the interesting parts of this was that the maps are often designed quite large. In episode 1, there's a particularly large outside level that had a ton to explore where I first found out that you could throw some items to get an insta-kill, which was a neat thing to find out. Another aspect of gameplay that I enjoyed was the guns. Each and every one had something that it does quite well, or has like a special ability. In the last few levels, you need each and every one of them to actually succeed. You have the top tier gun with the Riveter, often being safe for boss fights, but in earlier levels, the hunting rifle is great for picking off your enemies from afar. You have classic shotguns and pistols, but in the final areas, you also get a sword that has a charge attack. The game just has a weird sense of humor with weapons as well. Your crossbows go straight through enemies, which is kind of neat. They're like a weird energy crossbow. But you can also, like I mentioned earlier, find throwable weapons, and in every single level, there's a hidden bar of soap. If you can score a hit on an enemy by throwing it, they die instantly. There's just something really satisfying about that to me. For the level design, again, it's not the beautiful textures that I like. Again, they look like mud. It's the fact that every level rewards you for exploration unless you get lost sometimes. To me, games run a very fine line between being frustrating with this and actually making it fun. If you've watched through the playthrough, you've probably seen levels where I'm walking back and forth and trying to figure out where to go next. And while this has frustrated me in other games, in Dusk I'm also finding new areas and extra enemies to fight when I'm going back and forth. To contrast this, I'm playing Duke Nukem 3D right now on the Vita. I'm finding that often I'm getting lost in some of those levels and just walking through an empty map, finding nothing new and neat. Granted, I'm playing on a 5-inch screen and that probably doesn't help. On Dusk, I'm stumbling into a new group of enemies that need to be slain, or a room full of ammo, and maybe a new weapon. I think the other part of the levels that really stood out in the big battles or boss fights was there was often a key music track that was there to help you get in the mood, take down massive groups of enemies, or take down the boss that's in front of you. Most of the music in the game was developed by Andrew Heschel. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. He did great with it. All of it is in the vein of much older Boomer Shooter music, like the music developed by Doom, but with a much cleaner metal interpretation that's all his. Metal is usually not my thing, but when you're in the midst of a boss fight in Dusk, the music really helps the whole thing get together and makes the levels all in all great. The final thing we're going to hit on is the enemy design. Again, it's a running thing. None of them are at all pretty. None of them look great, but what they do is they look the part. Your soldiers, while being stretched textures and low poly figures, look the part of a game made in the 90s. To me, they often look like the soldiers in Half-Life 1. Your cultists, while being stretched textures on giant people, look like cultists in a game made in the 90s. And you look at them and go, hey, I bet that guy casting magic at me is probably in a cult. You might burn crosses too, but that adds to the ambiance of being in rural Pennsylvania, right? I think for the first time in a while, Dusk succeeded in making an enemy that scares me. The wiki calls them horrors, call them screamers, but these little guys run at you and scream in a weird analog horror screech, and ended up being pretty hard to kill. If you watch my playthroughs, you can usually see me jump when I get attacked by one. They look so dumb looking whenever I look at them in a picture or back on my playthrough, but I 100% know that if I was playing this in 2006 in the dark in my dad's office, I would have nightmares for days or nights on end. I was getting chased by these guys. You can't forget about boss fights whenever we're talking about enemy design. All of the bosses in this game and their associated arenas ended up being pretty fun to fight through. Honestly, more fun than Doom 2016 when I played it a few years ago. In Doom 2016, I liked the battles with like a whole bunch of enemies. I did not enjoy the boss fights that much. I was honestly surprised, but the devs at New Blood really knew how to give you a challenge with boss fights, but make the challenge not awful to deal with. Unfortunately, I think the last boss fight with that guy was the simplest to get through. You end up jumping platform to platform while targeting weak spots, kind of like a Resident Evil game. I really ended up liking the next to last boss fight with Jacob and getting it to take out the voice that's been taunting you the entire game, along with how the boss fight actually ended. I think the first one that really stumped me for a minute was the fight with Mama, mostly because she's the first enemy that deals so much damage to you, while also having so much health. In that boss fight, you really see having to use a Riveter as a in-game weapon, and knowing how to use it accurately and how to conserve ammo is what really helps you there. All in all, I enjoyed my time beating Dusk. I think I played it on and off for about a year, and it ended up being to about 6 to 8 hours of solid gameplay. I give it an 8 out of 10. I think you should pick it up sometime soon. It usually goes on sale for about $7, but even at $20, it's a solid game to play through if you really enjoy games like this. If you pay the $20 or the $7, you're supporting smaller devs, so I definitely recommend it.